So did you notice that with this book, the book of Nahum, we finished our 23rd book in the Bible? Like I can't get over like the grace that God has given us to just be able to keep going. So kudos to you and to me. So Nahum's prophecy from the book was about God's judgment on the Assyrian Empire, focusing on the destruction of his capital city, Nineveh. Yes, the same Nineveh that Jonah refused to go to preach, but eventually ended up going to preaching, and then they repented. However, that was 100 years earlier, so obviously they had reverted back and gone back to their evil lifestyle of violence and evil. Unlike Jonah, Nahum didn't refuse to go, but he didn't actually seem to be in Nineveh. He seemed rather to be prophesying to the people of Judah about Nineveh as a reassurance that their evil oppressors, the Assyrians, will ultimately be destroyed. This book conveys a message that the great Assyrian Empire would be destroyed, and it not only speaks to them but all the evil empires that will come before and would come after them. None of them would escape God's judgment. Now, the day of the reckoning of the Lord was a sure thing for them, in spite of their power and their influence at the time. And we've talked about this before in some of the books of the previous prophets. In chapter 1, verses 2 to 3, we see a reversed order of Exodus 34, 6 to 7, where God was speaking to Moses and telling him who he was. He said who he was the Lord. Here we know that God is to them. Here Nahum is speaking or he was speaking about, it was either to or about, from my understanding, God's enemy, and he's letting them know who God is to them. That's his enemies. So it was like a reversal. Moses was like, oh, I am the God of your fathers. Now the enemies was like, listen, this is who I am, the God that is going to do this, that, and the other. I thought that was really cool. Now, in some of the verses, we heard about God's jealousy when it says, oh, my jealousy towards his people. And God's jealousy in this verse refers to his displeasure with the capture and abuse of his people. Although he was the one who ordained it, and sometimes I know this could be just confusing to us as humans, but we must always remember that God's ways aren't our ways. Right? He was using Assyria to discipline his people. But then they were also responsible to God for the things that they did. For their arrogance, their evil, their violence, God was going to judge them. Now that he had judged Judah, he would deliver them from Assyria and then destroy Nineveh. Assyria was eventually overthrown by Babylon and vanished from the earth. Like no one can really trace their empire till now. And in chapter 3, 8 to 14, Nahum reminded the Ninevites about the fall of Egypt, who also thought that they were invincible, letting them know what happened to one of their victims will also happen to them, because Egypt was one of the victims of the Assyrian Empire. So it was like, oh, you think that you were so big and bad, so did Egypt, who you conquered, and you will also be conquered as well. Assyria had been so cruel to the surrounding nations that all of those who heard about their defeat would applaud and be happy that their enemies have fallen. And Assyria did finally fall in 612 BC. Now, let me share the lessons I learned about God from the book of Nahum. God is a defender of his people. He deals with injustice, period. Nations will arise and fall, but God is forever. This book may have been centered around the ancient empire, but we know that even today, in this day and age, there are empires and evil nations that are oppressing others. God sees all of this, and he has promised to mete out his judgment. So just put your hope in him, no matter what's going on. If you are in the nation that is being oppressed, know that God cares about you, and he cares and will judge injustice. Thanks for joining me today. And we'll be moving on. Tomorrow we'll continue with our story of the kings of Judah in 2 Kings 22 to 23, which we will read alongside 2 Chronicles 34 to 35. Looking forward to sharing with you. Have a wonderful day.